If I were to ask you who's the best player in baseball, you'd likely come up with an answer pretty quickly. What about the worst player? It may take you a bit longer, but you could still come up with a pretty good answer. But what about the most average player? That proves a bit difficult to answer, but that's what we'll be doing today. My name is Bobby, and this is Stat Stories. To find the most average MLB player, we need to understand what we mean by average. We'll be looking for someone who is as close to league average in several statistical categories, taking into account overall hitting ability, power, fielding, and base running. So the more a player stands out in one stat, the less likely they are to appear in this video. We'll start by finding the most average player from the 2018 season, and looking at all qualified hitters. A qualified hitter is one who has enough plate appearances in one season to qualify for a batting title, but for our purposes, this just means he played for most of the season. Also, we're just looking at position players, as average pitchers would make for a separate video. So, what stats are we looking at? I've chosen 14 different stats divided into 3 groups that we'll be looking at separately for now. We have the counting stats, consisting of home runs, runs scored, runs batted in, and stolen bases. Then we have the rates and averages, which are batting average, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, walk rate, and strikeout rate. Then there are our advanced stats, wins above replacement, weighted runs created plus, weighted on-base average, base running, and defensive runs saved. On to the counting stats. The averages for these stats were taken from our 140 qualified 2018 hitters. 21 homers, 77 runs scored, 73 RBI, and 10 stolen bases over the course of a full season. Using these stats, we have a short list of 4 players: Brian Dozier, Gregory Polanco, Jurickson Profar, and JT Realmuto. Starting with homers, all 4 are really close to average, but Dozier and Realmuto have exactly 21. With runs scored, all 4 are within 5 runs of average, with Polanco the closest. But with RBI, Polanco is the furthest away. Dozier and Realmuto are both just 1 RBI off the average. So lastly is stolen bases, and Realmuto is the furthest off, with the others really close to average. Now these stats are probably the worst at determining who the most average player is, but I thought it would still be interesting to look at, and Brian Dozier seems to be the most average with these measurements. So let's look at our rate stats. These averages were taken out of all MLB position players, so no pitchers are included. So we have a 252 average, 323 on base, 417 slugging, 8.6 walk percentage, and 21.7 strikeout percentage. Our shortlist for this group is as follows: Yonder Alonso, Brandon Crawford, Marwin Gonzalez, Eric Hosmer, and Rougned Odor. All 5 have an average that is quite average for a batting average. Yes, that was an old MLB The Show reference, thank you. On base percentage, Hosmer and Gonzalez are both just 1 point away, but all are within 6 points. We see some variation in slugging, as Alonso is the closest at 4 points away, and Hosmer and Crawford are pretty far off. With walk rate, everyone is within 1 percentage point, but Crawford and Alonso are the closest. Strikeout rate also has some variation, but the closest here is Alonso, with Odor the furthest away. So by this group of metrics, I would say Alonso is the closest to average. Now on to the advanced stats, and for some of you, this may be the only group that matters. We're looking for a player worth 2 WAR, weighted runs created plus of 100, weighted on base average of 320, base running rating of 0, and defensive runs saved of 0. Our group this time is Starlin Castro, Marwin Gonzalez again, Cesar Hernandez, Joe Mauer, and Nomar Mazara. So starting with WAR, and we have 3 players close to 2, while Mauer and Mazara are further off. This is due to Mauer and Mazara not providing the high level of offense expected of a first baseman or corner outfielder. This is reflected again in weighted runs created plus, and Hernandez is exactly league average in that stat. Even more remarkable is that he's exactly league average and weighted on base average as well, though all 5 of our players are pretty close to average. Looking at base running, and yet again, Hernandez is right around average, and so is Joe Mauer. It all comes down to defense, and Hernandez is far off the average. There's no easy choice here for who the most average is. If you can ignore defense, Hernandez is easily the closest to average you'll find. If we ignore wins above replacement, then I'd give it to Joe Mauer, but all things considered, I guess Starlin Castro would be the pick. Alright, so we've looked at 3 different groups of stats. Let's look at all of them now. to find the one average player to rule them all. And the two players I found we already mentioned, Yonder Alonso and Rougned Odor. Here are their stat lines. We've already established Alonso as the closest to average in all the rate and average stats, but Odor was in that shortlist as well. In the counting stats, Alonso hit more homers and drove in more runs, while Odor scored more and stole more bases. In the advanced metrics, Odor is the better base runner, but both are good defenders. The main difference is that Alonso's toolset isn't as valuable at first base as Odor's is at second base. So who is the most average? You can make the case for Alonso being the most average hitter, but since we're looking for an all-around player, Odor is the pick. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, great, but that's just one season. So I expanded our dataset to 3 seasons, 2016 to 18. I went through all the qualified hitters over that time period, which was 236 total players, and narrowed it down to 3. Now first, here are the league averages over this time period. For the most part, they are similar to 2018, though for the counting stats, they are increased. 52 homers is about 17 per season, 189 runs scored is 63 per season, 182 RBI is about 61 per season, and 22 steals is about 7 per season. So now our players. We have Marwin Gonzalez, who we have already mentioned in this video, Jason Kipnis, and Marcus Semien. And boom. Here are their stats. We'll go from left to right. So Semien steals more bases and scores more. Gonzalez is more of a run producer, and Kipnis is somewhere in the middle. And our rates and averages, Gonzalez appears to be an above-average hitter, Semien a bit below average, and Kipnis is closest to average. And in the advanced stats, Gonzalez has the WAR total we're looking for, but is still an above-average hitter. Taking in all of this information, I would have to say Jason Kipnis is the closest to an average player we can find. Aside from being a somewhat above-average base runner, he's close to the major league average in basically every stat. One thing I should say is that being average in baseball is not a bad thing. Think of it this way. The above average players will always be there, but there's a constant cycle of below average players. They get called up, play a season or two, and get replaced by other below average players. So while you may wonder if your team can do better than put an average player in the lineup every day, just know you could also be doing much worse at that spot. So that concludes this video. Feel free to like and share, and comment below who you think the most average player in baseball is. Also, click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on more videos like this in the future. Thanks for watching.